months been earnestly engaged in giving shape to a national food security bill which will make access to food a constitutional right. With food grains production not radically picking up, with inflation continuing to rage and the population continuing to grow as before, it is high time legal frameworks were put in place to protect weaker sections of society from starvation. The ramifications of the measure are immense and costs involved enormous. It is only to be expected that it will call for careful thought and consultations. Welcome to Public Forum. Today we talk about the proposed Food Security Act, which in all likelihood may be tabled in the Lok Sabha during the winter session. And to discuss the same, we have with us in the studios a distinguished panel of guests. Please welcome to the program Biraj Patnaik, a principal advisor to the Commissioners of Supreme Court on the Right to Food. And we are also joined by Dr. Upendra Das, who is a senior fellow with RIS, that would be Research and Information System for Developing Countries. And later in the program, we will be joined by a noted agriculture expert, Prem Vashish. And before we begin the discussion, let's take a look at this report.
The issue of rotting food grains and the Supreme Court order directing the government to distribute them among the hungry has become a national sore point. A series of media reports has found lakhs of tons of food grain wasting away because there aren't enough warehouses for storage. In a country where children die of starvation and where India's position in the Global Hunger Index is worse than that of 25 sub-Saharan African countries, the issue has become more urgent than ever. And so in August, the Supreme Court said Agriculture Minister Sharad Pawar should figure out how to give away the excess food grain to poor families. Mr. Pawar responded by saying,
अभी तक मेरे पास फाइनल कोर्ट के ऑर्डर आई नहीं, मगर ये सदन को मैं कहना चाहता हूँ कि ये सरकार सुप्रीम कोर्ट हो या हाई कोर्ट हो, इनके कोई भी डिसीजन हो, इसकी पूरी तरह से इज्जत करेगी.
On the other hand, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh yesterday said that the Supreme Court should not get into the realm of policy formulation. An estimated 37% people live below poverty line. How can free food be given to so many? The government informed the court that it has set aside an additional 25 lakh tons for distribution through ration shops. The government is also working on the Right to Food Act that is expected to ensure freedom from hunger, malnutrition and other deprivations associated with the lack of food. The National Advisory Council led by Sonia Gandhi has also been focusing on a complex right to food campaign. But at this stage, the biggest challenge for the government is to how it can reduce India's hungry mouths. How can India ensure sustainable food security for a billion-plus population? Natasha Jha for Lok Sabha Television.
So how to feed hungry mouths, how to ensure sustainable food security for a billion-plus population, indeed an urgent issue that needs urgent attention. Beginning the discussion with Biraj Patnaik. Mr. Patnaik, enacting a law on food security has been on the agenda of the government for a long time now. We know that in June 2009, President Pratibha Patil reiterated the government's resolve to bring in a National Food Security Act. It was something that was to be achieved in the first 100 days of the government, but don't you think it has taken a bit too long?
I think it's taken inordinately long, to put it mildly. We were hoping that it would have been introduced in Parliament in the current session. Admittedly, a law of this nature is very complex. It involves financial decisions of great magnitude. And therefore, there is no problem if we have a very robust law which comes in. But it has been inordinately long, one. Secondly, I think the situation today has to be viewed from two perspectives. One is a short-term perspective on how do we deal with the excess grain, and we'll perhaps come to that a little later and the Prime Minister's statement regarding that. But from a long-term perspective, I think the National Advisory Council, which is looking at this law, they're looking at really, I would say, 5 aspects in terms of the law. Firstly, the law must have as a very minimum what the entitlements have been already created under the Supreme Court led right to food case, the judgments of the Supreme Court in the right to food case. Secondly, a new set of entitlements must be created for very poor and very marginalized people who are outside the pale of policy making. The third consideration that the NAC must give and is considering actively is to have a justiciable framework, to have a framework of accountability, because there is no point in having more and more schemes if these are not, if implementation remains weak. How do you have a framework similar to that, or rather learning from that of the RTI and NREJ, which would make it justiciable? Fourthly, we should reform some of our existing programs, like the ICDS, like the public distribution system. Without reforms, we are looking at a situation where there will be a lot of money going to these programs, but these programs not delivering the outcome. And lastly, to have an act which has enabling provisions with regard to land, water, nutrition security, and so on. And I think to merge all of this is a very complex exercise, and to do it with the various pulls and pressures. For instance, there is an enormous pressure bearing on the National Advisory Council to have a universal public distribution system. But universal public distribution is something that the government of India is completely opposed to, or so it would seem from the statements made by the Prime Minister or the Food Minister on the floor of Parliament. But for the Right to Food campaign, which has struggled over the last 10 years, nothing short of a universal public distribution campaign would do so far as this act is concerned. So there are various pulls and pressures, and I think there is this plus the enormous financial implications about which I think the government is unconvinced and does not have the political will, to be very frank.
We'll talk about its shape and scope a little later in the program. Dr. Das, coming to you now, what do you think is taking this legislation so long, considering that the time seems to be absolutely right for such an act to be enacted, considering prices are skyrocketing?
Well, it's a very noble intention, and we must be doing it. But when you see food security and a bill of this kind, it has to be viewed in the broader economic development paradigm of the country. And as my colleague mentioned, the financial implications in terms of subsidies, it's enormous. I guess the reports I have seen is around rupees 70,000 crores, it may mean. And subsidies, by definition, Indian paradigm in recent times has been such that we have been trying to reduce it, because it distorts prices, it inducts inefficiencies in the system. And this kind of subsidy burden would impact the fiscal deficit. Now, fiscal deficit widening would have its own implications and ramifications in the economy. So, I guess when we are talking about food bill, it is something very important. But because of the complex nature in terms of its inherent structure, its interrelatedness with other policy mechanisms and the objectives of the economic development and growth, which has been quite impressive even in the wake of financial meltdown, also is one of the determining factors for the delay.
Right. Plus also the fact that it comes at a time when the government is undertaking fiscal consolidation. Mr. Patnaik, but according to reports, the National Advisory Council, which examined the draft of the proposed legislation on August 30th last, is yet to take a clear decision on its scope and the kind of shape it will take. Now, it has two options before it. One would be of near universalization of food subsidy, which means every household will be entitled to 35 kgs of food grains at 3 rupees per kg. And to begin with, it will be implemented in 150 most backward districts of the country. But the cost of the subsidy will be huge, close to 90,000 crore, which is nearly 35,000 crore more than the government was prepared for. The other option is of differential entitlements. That is to say, it will extend the benefit of 35 kgs food grains at the rate of 3 rupees per kg only to some 40 to 42% of the weaker sections as estimated in the Tendulkar Committee report, and the rest too will get 25 kgs of food grains. The price is not yet decided, could be somewhere between 5 rupees per kg to 7 rupees per kg. But do you think universalization is going to be a workable option?
Well, let me put it this way. Firstly, I'd like to say that the public distribution system, because my knowledge about National Advisory Council's deliberations is as much as yours from media reports. But from what I have examined and from their website and the discussions that have been going on, the public distribution system is only one part of the National Food Security Act. There are a lot of other things which we are talking about. I think we need to highlight, and we'll perhaps come to that a little later. But even within the even within the public distribution system, I think not only is a universal public distribution system workable, it is eminently desirable. It is desirable, and I think the subsidy burden, let's say 100,000 crores. Now it sounds like a lot of money, but 100,000 crores is 1/5 of the revenues foregone in just this financial year for the corporate sector. If you look at the statement of revenues foregone in the union budget, just this one single year, in the current year, we've given away 5 lakh crores as revenues foregone to the corporate sector. So if you do a comparative analysis, you're giving away 5 lakhs to people who are already very rich. I read a report last week which said that we have 127,000 millionaires, 1,27,000 millionaires. We have 52 dollar billionaires, which is 3 times the number of dollar billionaires for all of Scandinavia put together. And at the same time, half of Indian children are malnourished. At the same time, we are ranked 66 out of 88 countries in the global hunger index. Worse than most sub-Saharan countries. At the same time, the average low birth weight in India is 30% as compared to 15% for Africa. So the second fastest growing economy in the world, having these kind of social indicators, being ranked 134th in the Human Development Index. Now, if we allow budgetary constraints to even enter the discussion, I think we may be mistaken. So I think that there is a universal PDS is necessary. It may cost more at this point in time, but in the long run, in terms of its effectiveness, because it would do away with targeting, and you see one of the principal problems of failure of the PDS has been the inclusion and exclusion errors. Right. In a society like ours, which is so deeply flawed at a very fundamental level, where there is so much of discrimination along gender, caste, and socioeconomic class lines, any form of targeting that we use is likely to fail. And therefore, I am with the proponents of universalization, and I would think that universalization is not just a workable option, but a desirable one. And state governments which have universalized their public distribution system or near universalized the public distribution system, be it Tamil Nadu, be it Chhattisgarh, be it Andhra Pradesh, have demonstrated that they have the best public distribution system in the country. So the government should be asking itself, what is it that these state governments have done right, and that they could replicate for the National Food Security Act.
And we won't have to depend on the BPL surveys.
We do not have to do a survey, we do not have to categorize the poor.
Right.
And people who do not want to access these food grains, if you have a good, robust public distribution system with a last mile, what we call a last mile authentication, based on biometrics or based on any robust system that does not allow for leakages, you would actually have 100% of this country is not going to lift their food grains. The top 30% perhaps would not lift any food grains from the public distribution system.
So you're saying...
So in the long run, it's going to be much more viable.
Okay, so universalization is not just workable, it is also desirable. We'll take a quick break right now. We are discussing food security. We'll be right back. Stay tuned to Public Forum.
जानना चाहेंगे कुछ समय पहले हमारी जिंदगी कैसी थी?
क्यों मिस्टर गोयल, आजकल आपका दिमाग काम नहीं करता?
सब गलत है, तुमको कुछ भी याद नहीं रहता? बहू, तुम सब कुछ भूल जाती हो।
और जब से हमने योग अपनाया, सब कुछ बदल गया।
मिस्टर गोयल, क्या दिमाग लगाया है?
अरे वाह, सब कुछ याद रहने लगा। जब से मैंने योगा किया है, मैं कुछ नहीं भूलती।
योग बनाए रखता है शारीरिक और मानसिक संतुलन और बच्चों में बढ़ाता है स्मरण शक्ति।
जो करे योगासन, स्वस्थ रहे तन मन। बहन जी, रोशनी के माँ और पिता आए हैं।
बहन जी नमस्ते।
नमस्ते। रोशनी की पढ़ाई अच्छी चल रही है। आजकल मैं उसे गणित में जोड़ और घटाने के सवालों का खूब अभ्यास करा रही हूँ।
बहन जी सवाल हो गए। रोशनी की कॉपी तो देखिए, कल 10 में से 8 सवाल ठीक थे, आज सारे 10 के 10 ठीक हैं। शाबाश रोशनी, शाबाश रोशनी।
अरे भाई कहाँ चले इस मुद्रा में?
मेरी मुद्रा के साथ खिलवाड़ किया गया। मैंने टीवी खरीदा था, जो गड़बड़ निकला। अब सीधा कंज्यूमर कोर्ट जाकर केस ठोक दूंगा।
तुझे पहले दुकानदार से बात करनी चाहिए। अगर दुकानदार नहीं सुनता तो तुझे कंपनी में बात करनी चाहिए। अगर कंपनी वाले भी बात नहीं सुनते तो तुझे कंज्यूमर कोर्ट जाना चाहिए।
ठीक है,
जागो ग्राहक, जागो।
ठीक है।
अरे वाह, क्या बात है।
अरे क्या कर रहा है?
जुकाम है ना, होम्योपैथी की दवा खा रहा हो भाई।
ये तो मीठी होती है ना, और तुझे तो डायबिटीज है।
अरे डायबिटीज वाले भी होम्योपैथी की मीठी गोलियां खा सकते हैं।
अच्छा,
हाँ, क्योंकि उसमें ना के बराबर चीनी है।
क्या होम्योपैथी के साथ और दवाइयाँ ले सकते हैं?
हाँ हाँ, क्यों नहीं, लेकिन होम्योपैथी डॉक्टर की सलाह से ही लेना।
होम्योपैथी दवाइयाँ सरल सही सुरक्षित।
Welcome back to Public Forum. We are discussing food security and how to ensure that the country is more food secure at large. And right now in the program, we are joined by Professor Prem Vashisht, a Dean in the School of Business Studies, Sharda University. Welcome to Public Forum, Professor Vashisht. Well, before we take the discussion any further, we'd like to tell you that after reports that lakhs of tons of food grains were rotting away or wasting away because of lack of space in government facilities, the Supreme Court said the government should figure out a way to give away this food grain to the poor. Agriculture Minister Sharad Pawar said that the court, what it had offered was a suggestion and the government would look into it, but the court responded by saying that what it had given was indeed an order, not a suggestion. Take a look at what he had to say in Lok Sabha when the matter came up for discussion in the House.
ने एक बहुत ऐतिहासिक निर्णय दिया है और सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने निर्णय देते हुए ये कहा है कि एक तरफ इस देश में लोग भूखों मर रहे हैं और दूसरी तरफ लाखों लाख टन अनाज गोदामों में सड़ रहा है। इसलिए भूखों को, गरीब लोगों को मुफ्त में ये अनाज बांटा जाना चाहिए। और उन्होंने सरकार को फटकार लगाते हुए ये कहा कि ये बात हमने सुझाव के तौर पर नहीं कही थी, हमने आदेश के तौर पर कही थी और एक सप्ताह के अंदर वो योजना बनाकर लाएगी कि किस तरह से ये बिना पैसे के निःशुल्क ये अनाज गरीबों में बांटा जाएगा। ये योजना एक सप्ताह के अंदर सरकार लाए।
इस देश में 4-5 सूबों में अभी सूखा पड़ा। सरकार कोई रास्ता निकाल करके जो अनाज सड़ रहा है उसे बांटने का पहले काम एनडीए की सरकार में हमने किया है। जो राजस्थान में हमने 1 लाख टन जो है वो फ्री में अनाज दिया है। ये कोई ऐसी एक्सेप्शन बात नहीं है। इसलिए सरकार से मेरा निवेदन है कि इस पर तत्काल कोई कार्रवाई करके तत्काल रास्ता निकाल करके सूखा है पानी को अनाज पहुँचाने का काम करना चाहिए।
जब हमारी सरकार थी उत्तर प्रदेश में और यूपी में बाढ़ जब आई तो सारे के सारे उत्तर प्रदेश के कोले से खुलवा दिया मैंने माल को दिखा और दीजिए हम आपका आलू जितना जाएगा वो दे देंगे। इसके साथ साथ हम जब खुद गए तो उन्होंने कहा इतना फायदा आराम मुझे कभी नहीं मिला और टेंट लगा दिए और उनके साथ खाना खाया। अब ये क्या तरीका, इंसानियत बिल्कुल चली गई क्या?
पूरे देश में जो गरीब है, किसान है, मजदूर है, वो बाढ़ से सूखा से परेशान है, आज भूखों मर रहा है और पार्लियामेंट के अंदर इस पर चर्चा हुई कि अनाज सड़ रहा है गोदाम के बाहर। सरकार को उसे बंटवाना चाहिए गरीबों में और इसका गंभीर मामला है कि सुप्रीम कोर्ट इसको नोटिस लिया और एक बार नहीं 2 बार सुप्रीम कोर्ट के निर्देश देने के बाद सरकार से संज्ञान में न लेने का कारण क्या है?
ये कोई राजनीतिक बात नहीं हो रही है, ये हमारी जिम्मेवारी है, सरकार की जिम्मेवारी है। कृषि मंत्री के सामने भी ये सवाल उठा था लेकिन उन्होंने हल्के फुल्के में मामले को टाल दिया।
अभी तक मेरे पास फाइनल कोर्ट के ऑर्डर आई हुई
मगर ये सदन को मैं कहना चाहता हूँ कि ये सरकार सुप्रीम कोर्ट हो या हाई कोर्ट हो, इनके कोई भी डिसीजन हो, इसकी पूरी तरह से इज्जत करेगी। एक इसके साथ साथ इस संसद के माननीय सदस्यों ने जो इस बारे में कुछ सुझाव दे दिया, इस पर भी गंभीरता से ध्यान देंगे और ये दोनों ही कहकर इस पर जो कोई कदम उठाने की आवश्यकता है वो कदम उठाने की तैयारी ये सरकार की रहेगी।
Well, we know that the Prime Minister recently said that when an estimated 37% of the population lives below poverty line, how can free food grain be distributed to all? Continuing the discussion with Professor Vashish. Professor Vashish, before we come to the larger issue of the problem of storage of food grains in our country, I'd like your views on the issue of this standoff between the executive and the judiciary, the role of the executive, judiciary and legislature in enforcing the right to food.
Well, I think the role by and large are absolutely clear. That's the job of the judiciary to look after all this. But the matter has taken a very different turn because the parliament was in session that time. And secondly, the matter went to the Supreme Court. I think, to me, it's not very shocking. Frankly speaking, the grain has been rotting earlier too. Last 20 years story you can see that it has been once a while, except few years when you have some deficits, etc. So just because it came to the Supreme Court and at the same time it was pointed out the grain has been rotting around, so it became a big issue. It was flashed in the media. So this kind of ground reality has been there before. But I mean, to me it's absolutely clear because since the Honorable Supreme Court has highlighted that and mentioned very clearly, there is absolutely no way to escape. You got to obey the orders. But at today's newspaper I say it was not an order, it was a suggestion. So whatever term you use and whatever it was, I haven't seen the original order. The point is that rather than wasting grain, you really get back to the poor. Now referring to the other thing that 37% population is poor and you can't afford to do that. You see, one can have a little different opinion in the sense that I wouldn't argue for absolutely free, but main point is not whether you distribute it absolutely free or you highly subsidize it. Different models are available. Like Chhattisgarh is giving much more subsidy compared to what the issue price is announced by the government. So it is up to the particular state government to take enough steps. If you really want to do that, you're welcome to do that. If your resources permit, certainly not. Why not? Go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Patnaik, is this how you look at it?
Well, I would say it's an unnecessary standoff. And I think it reflects rather poorly on the Prime Minister to say what he did yesterday, because his comments have to be seen in a certain context, which we spoke about earlier. Now, the Prime Minister of the second fastest growing economy in the world is defending not just the food minister, but is defending the actions of the entire cabinet, including the empowered group of ministers headed by Mr. Pranab Mukherjee, who have incidentally, these are the suggestions that the Supreme Court made based on our reports and the reports of the Supreme Court commissioners. We had never recommended free food grains. The affidavit that was filed in the court had given a series of other recommendations similar to what Dr. Vashish said. It was only when government repeatedly, hearing after hearing, refused to take cognizance of the suggestions that an exasperated bench said that, look, if you can't take up these suggestions, then why don't you give it at very low cost or no cost to the poor? That was the context of the remarks. And I think that the Prime Minister's remarks are really unfortunate because, the right to food is enshrined in Article 21, in the right to life. In the constitutional scheme of things, if the executive and the legislature does not perform their roles, as a citizen, I have a natural redress to justice. And therefore, if some people have gone to the court and raised this issue, and a government has repeatedly tried not to take any action on it, it deserves a judicial censure, and it received a judicial censure. Now, instead of constructively suggesting how to go ahead.
Okay. But the government has announced that it has set aside an additional 25 lakh million
It
tons of
actually
food
means
grains
nothing
for
because
distribution
look,
through fair prices.
if you look at our food stocks today, we are holding on close to 60 million metric tons. In fact, last month it was 61.8 million metric tons. This is the highest, second highest stock that we've ever had. Our buffer in strategic norm requirement is 22 million metric tons.
Right.
We are holding more than almost 3 times the buffer stock. And the Food Corporation of India and the Food Ministry have over the last 1 year repeatedly told Government of India and the empowered group of ministers that we will end up in this situation. Please release it to the state governments at even above poverty line prices. Release it to the market through open market sales agreements, open market sales. But unfortunately, the government has been lax in acting on these recommendations of the Food Ministry. So I think the attention that is drawn to Mr. Pawar is in a sense, reflective of the lackadaisical attitude towards food security that UPA 2 has adopted, which is very disappointing.
Okay, I'd like to come to Dr. Das now. Dr. Das, as regards storage, we all know our situation seems to be deplorable. The government procures around 5.5 million metric tons of food grains every year, while our godowns have the storage capacity of only 4.3 million metric tons. So naturally, large amounts of food grains have to be left out in the open.
You see, this is what the real issue is. You see, we should understand what the problem is. I think the mechanism whereby we provide assurance to farmers that you produce, you earn the minimum support price, we would just buy it, right? Now, the whole problem is not that after we have bought it, if we have having, insufficient storage space or unscientific way of storing them, that needs to be solved by, distributing it just like that, because, you see, humane face is a subjective matter. I think one can adopt and take a view whereby we would like to inculcate a culture within our country that you earn your livelihood. My farmers are not beggars. It is better that they work, they are assured that whatever they will do, they will produce, they will be assured of a minimum support price. After that, it is my headache how to store it. Now, so the issue is the storage.
Right.
Issue is not that we are actually not having human face for the farmers. Let us not treat them as beggars, So I feel that the entire debate shifted more towards what to do with the grains,
Right.
Rather than understanding that we are short of storage capacity.
True.
That is the real problem.
Right. So lack of storage capacity seems to be at the root of the problem, Professor Rajesh.
Well, you see, that's one aspect. But, we don't have time to go into more complications because I don't, subscribe to this kind of vicious circle that you keep on, procuring so much year after you keep on announcing, even if you don't need that much, you are bound to do that because you made a commitment. So this policy itself is faulty, and there's no time to debate, what the kind of remedies are. But I certainly would argue with Dr. Das that again, what is really surprising and disgusting is that all this is known for last more than 2 decades. That you don't have the storage capacity. Government has been talking about private-public partnership model to develop storage capacity. They have not been able to attract enough investment from the private sector. Why? Now these are the critical issues. Why don't you treat it like infrastructure? As you invite private investment for highways and many other things, airport, this should also be taken as a priority item. And if you think there are certain problems with incentives or disincentives in the whole scheme of attracting private investment, one must look into that seriously.
Right.
So I don't think it is something which cannot be corrected. Now these are the critical issues which need very serious reform. Now attached to that is that one must think of a fundamental question. Should FCI keep on intervening like this indefinitely? And you are in a vicious circle. And I think I'll cut short my answer. I think time has come where FCI should not be playing that kind of role. It should play a supportive role You limit your procurement, you got to change your price policy.
Okay.
You got to really focus on raising the productivity in the eastern region. There would be enough grain. But there are structural problems with the policy. You are in a vicious circle. So you keep on doing the same thing, make the same mistake. Storage problem.
Right.
So what surprises me, all these issues have been there for more than 2 decades. But they have not been attacked properly.
So you're saying these are systemic problems.
Systemic problems.
Yeah. Well, we'll take yet another break. When we come back, we'll talk about how to incentivize the farmer and, of course, identifying the BPL beneficiaries. Stay tuned to Public Forum. We are discussing food security. We'll be right back.
जी मेरा सामान तैयार है।
मैम आपको बिल बनाऊं या बिल पे चल जाएगा?
पैसा बताइए।
1550।
सर ये बिल न बनाने से हमारा क्या फायदा है?
बेटा बिल बनेगा तो टैक्स लगेगा। मैडम ये आपका बिल। सामान में कोई कमी हो तो बस ये बिल साथ में जरूर ले आइएगा।
ये है एक अनजान और समझदार ग्राहक उत्पाद।
पॉलिसी तो 30 दिन के अंदर मिल जाती है और अगर नहीं मिलती तो जिस कंपनी से पॉलिसी की थी उसके दफ्तर जाकर लेके शिकायत कर दो। देश के 12 शहरों में 12 ओम्बड्समैन होते हैं। 12 शहर हैं चंडीगढ़, न्यू दिल्ली, लखनऊ, भोपाल, अहमदाबाद, मुंबई, एर्नाकुलम, चेन्नई, हैदराबाद, भुवनेश्वर, कोलकाता, गुवाहाटी। और हाँ, व्यक्तिगत बीमा पॉलिसी जो 20 लाख रुपए से कम हो उससे संबंधित शिकायत बीमा लोकपाल से की जा सकती है। चाचा,
अरे मीना,
स्कूल की छुट्टी है, मिलने चले आए।
मीरा तुम्हारी भी छुट्टी है ना? मैं स्कूल नहीं जाती।
स्कूल जाके क्या करेगी?
अरे पढ़ने लिखने से बिटिया की समझ निखरेगी, मान बढ़ेगा और तुम्हारी शान।
चाचा जी स्कूल में तो हम बहुत कुछ सीखते हैं।
जमाना बदल रहा है, पढ़ाई ही बेटियों का असली गहना है। असली गहना है।
Welcome back to Public Forum. We are talking about food security and the proposed food security bill. And if you want to share your views on the subject we are discussing in Public Forum this evening, you can call us on our toll-free numbers that are 18001153313 and 18001153314. Continuing the discussion with Viraj Patnaik. Mr. Patnaik, we know that the NAC has also recommended the reform of the public distribution system, which should include that panchayats and community institutions run their own PDS outlets, doorstep delivery to PDS outlets, also decentralizing procurement and storage. How important are these measures?
I think these are very, very critical measures. And I would add computerization, end-to-end computerization of the entire public distribution chain, so that PDS can be accessed by migrant workers who don't necessarily stay in their village but move from one location to the other. I would think that the success of the Food Security Act, I would go so far as to say that the success of the Food Security Act is contingent on these reforms happening. If you have more of the same, then I think we're in very serious trouble. Because unless you have more faith in your panchayats, unless you decentralize procurement and storage, unless you create the infrastructure at the district, at the block, at the village level for this to happen, unless you use creatively information technology as has been done in many states now, very, very successfully in a range of spheres of social sector, unless you do all of this, and it's feasible, it's within reach, I think the Food Security Act without that, which just gives a guarantee, and we know what happens to that guarantee. We know that, in the field, when you travel in the field, and I do a fair bit of traveling, one doesn't see these benefits reaching the people. So I hope the Food Security Act drives these reforms, not just in the public distribution system, but also in the ICDS, which is a critical program for dealing with malnutrition, with the midday meal scheme, with all of these.
Right. Professor Vashish, clearly all of these measures would go a long way in plugging the loopholes in the system.
Well, I don't differ with that, but I have some basic differences on the approach per se. The first question is, do you have to really intervene to that extent? Intervention is necessary. And I come back to the fundamental question, why is it necessary for FCI to go on procuring millions and millions of things beyond that, prescribed norms? That's the basic question, and it leads to many other questions. So let me come back to what Mr. Patnaik was saying. So first of all, you don't have to do that. You do because it is contingent upon creating whole host of infrastructure. And if you really go to the villages of poor villages in Bihar, I have traveled very extensively. I know it is virtually very, very difficult, let me tell you, to create such a fine infrastructure because there are very fundamental problems. So it's going to be an illusion. Therefore, what I would subscribe, to let the FCI reduce its operations, to confine to the norms required, plus minus 10%, for any kind of contingency, if you have drought and floods and all that. And then leave rest to the kind of, open market operations, leave it to the trade. If they would take the grain to the villages, combined with that, you must think very seriously of replacing PPDS by direct transfer through cash transfers, because except the areas which are not reachable or very difficult, say some of the hilly tracts, some of the difficult tribal areas where you won't have any bank, you won't have post office, you won't have roads, it is going to be very difficult. There you can follow Chhattisgarh type model. I am using the word type model because it's not 100% perfect. There are problems, but it seems to be working. Therefore, if something is working better than the PPDS, I think there is no harm in appreciating it. You adopt a model and rest wherever the infrastructure is reasonable, you make direct cash transfer. After all, still you are subsidizing.
Dr. Das, do you think a thing such as direct transfers is workable?
I agree with the decentralization aspect because I'm not very sure about the direct cash transfers because one has to analyze. There are a lot of contrary views. But I think this debate is overemphasizing on distribution and storage. That the problem and solutions of distribution and storage would be incumbent upon the production.
Right.
Now, food security should begin with securing production. There are groundwater levels going down, which is actually decreasing productivity. There are problems with soil, the soil nutrients, the entire soil research exercise. Those are the issues that should actually contribute to the productivity. Unless you produce, what will you store and then distribute? So I think somewhere you need to have very comprehensive view about this. And the issue that why is that FCI is going on and on procuring? If they do not do so, what would the farmers do with their grain? Today it is rotting here. In the other case, it would rot in their own houses without getting the minimum support price, for which would not be possible to continue.
I completely agree with this, and I think cash transfer will not work in India for the following reasons. there is no evidence in India, in fact, nowhere in the world, that cash transfers have led to increasing nutritional outcomes. They're not. I mean, they're very clear. Even the most successful cash transfer models, like the Oportunidades or Bolsa Familias from Brazil, largely in Latin America. Secondly, in India, a gender inequitous society like India, there is very clear evidence that when cash comes into the household, it's controlled by the men folk. When food comes into the household, it's controlled by the men. Thirdly, cash would make, it's like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. You cannot inflation index it. It's very difficult. So if this week I'm receiving 100 rupees as my transfer, and look at the kind of inflation we had. Now government very simply says, okay, we'll inflation index it. They have not been able to inflation index, it's, direct cash transfer programs like pensions for the last 25 years. So that's the third problem. Fourthly, if you're doing cash transfers, you cannot procure. Because what would you do with those food grains? And procurement is a necessity. The minimum support price is a guarantee for farmers, and I completely agree with Dr. Rasan that we cannot turn our backs on. And most importantly, I would say that the right to food is about three things. It's about access, it's about availability, it's about absorption.
Right.
Cash transfer doesn't deal with any of these. In fact, I think not only will cash transfers not solve the problem that we are seeking to solve, they would bring with them a whole host of other problems that we don't currently have. So I don't, I'm afraid, I don't subscribe to Dr. Vash's view, but there are different opinions on this. And one is,
both of my learned colleagues. Let me tell you, you see, we only talk of symptoms, not the root cause. Like what my friend Dr. Das was pointing out, you see, you got to raise a very fundamental question. Why is it that states like Punjab, Haryana and Western UP, they keep on producing wheat and paddy, wheat and cotton? And then it leads to the, groundwater depletion. So it's a vicious cycle. You are ensuring Punjab, Haryana, Western UP farmers produce any amount, we will take it. Therefore, they have no incentive to diversify. Okay? Right. Now, we can debate where do you go from here, how do you diversify this. We don't have enough time to go into all those details. So that's my first question. You are following a price policy which is preventing diversification and which is leading to, it's one of the causes for groundwater depletion because paddy is highly water intensive.
One way to do this diversification is to offer a minimum support price mechanism for other crops. There is nothing that prevents Government of India from offering it for fruits and vegetables and pulses and other cereals, which is as critical as rice and wheat. Right. That's one form of diversification.
And
you can retain the MSP
mechanism on rice and wheat.
Absolutely. In fact, that's one of the demands of the Right to Food campaign also, that we need to move away from our dependence on rice and wheat, move on to local millets, introduce local millets in the public distribution system. They're more nutritious and they would be better targeted because a large number of, there's a lot of black marketing that very easily happens with rice and wheat, which would be difficult with, say, kodo or kurti or jawar or bajra or ragi. So there is certainly an argument for diversification and within the PDS also. But I wouldn't advise or go in with this formulation of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I have exercised caution.
Allow me to complete my argument. Okay, so you will get your point. I never argued that you stop procurement. You see, what's happened in a debate like this, people tend to take very extreme positions. And the moment you put forward an argument, the other guy swings to the other extreme. I never said it. You stop procurement. I never said it. You do away with your procurement policy or this kind of price policy. I never said it. I never implied that you don't procure pulses in oilseeds. Certainly. You see, I have been to tribal areas and I would be the first one to subscribe to the philosophy, whatever they produce at the ground level, the local will procure that. You don't need these stories for it. So I'm for it. You have a procurement price for pulses. You have procurement price of certain minimum level of oilseeds. Do that by all means. And you are directly helping the areas which are with low productivity because pulses, oilseeds and the kind of small grains are produced by in Bastar, for example. Do that by all means. Absolutely no point of difference. Where I differ is, do not keep on supporting indefinitely and ensure that if we have to procure 20 million tons, we will do that. That is disaster.
Right.
Because that's what is leading to ground level, water depletion.
Right. Also, Professor Vishnu, there is also the fear that the area under food crops is shrinking consistently. What with large stretches coming under urbanization and SEZs. We'll talk. Yeah, we'll talk more on that in just a bit. We have to take yet another break in the program. We are discussing food security. Stay with us for the final segment of the program.
अरे भाई कहाँ चले इस मुद्रा में?
मेरी मुद्रा के साथ खिलवाड़ किया गया है। मैंने टीवी खरीदा था जो गड़बड़ निकला, अब सीधा कंज्यूमर कोर्ट जाकर केस ठोक दूंगा।
तुझे पहले दुकानदार से बात करनी चाहिए। अगर दुकानदार नहीं सुनता तो तुझे कंपनी में बात करनी चाहिए। अगर कंपनी वाले भी बात नहीं सुनते तो तुझे कंज्यूमर कोर्ट जाना चाहिए।
ठीक है,
जागो ग्राहक, जागो।
बहन जी, रोशनी के माँ और पिता आए हैं।
बहन जी नमस्ते।
नमस्ते। रोशनी की पढ़ाई अच्छी चल रही है। आजकल मैं उसे गणित में जोड़ और घटाने के सवालों का खूब अभ्यास करा रही हूँ। बहन जी, सवाल हो गए। रोशनी की कॉपी तो देखिए। कल 10 में से 8 सवाल ठीक थे। आज सारे 10 के 10 ठीक हैं। शाबाश रोशनी। शाबाश रोशनी।
जी मेरा सामान तैयार है।
मैम आपको बिल बनाऊं या बिल पे चल जाएगा?
पैसा बताइए।
1550।
सर, ये बिल न बनाने से हमारा क्या फायदा है?
बेटा बिल बनेगा तो टैक्स लगेगा। मैडम ये आपको बिल। सामान में कोई कमी हो तो बस ये बिल साथ में जरूर ले आइएगा।
ये है एक अनजान और समझदार ग्राहक का फर्क।
Welcome back to Public Forum. We are talking about the Food Security Bill, the country's boldest attempt to tackle malnutrition and hunger. Continuing the discussion with Dr. Das. Dr. Das, we know that the right to food can only be ensured with the help of the farmer. But what is the prospect, according to you, in regards to agricultural production or food grain production in our country? Now, over the years, it seems to be stagnating.
Yes. We are facing a paradox. On one hand, as Dr. Vasisht was mentioning, it's because of intensive agriculture, just concentrated to wheat and rice, you are having these problems, and that is happening because there is an assured government procurement. So they need to diversify. On the other hand, there has been a problem of people diversifying from basic food grains to cash crops. At some point in time, we may confront a situation where not only the poorer, we are talking about few poor people, but even the entire population of the country may face with shortage of products in cereals. Today, we are importing pulses. At different points of time, we have imports of cereals. So, food self-sufficiency in cereals on one hand, the related problems on one hand, and people going for cash crops on the other hand, this creates a paradox.
Right.
Now, one way to resolve this paradox is to actually have an incentive structure which is governed by a macro perspective, because at the micro level, whatever happens, it is basically within a macro paradigm, and you have to understand what people's basic needs are, and to cater to those needs, you need to have a policy framework at the macro level, and that is why the food security bill is very crucial. But as I said, that needs to focus on the production side and the problems of production and diversification or lack of diversification on one hand. Second is that I don't know. You have integrated child development scheme, you have midday meal program, you have targeted public distribution system.
But again, the ICDS and midday meal, they're all universal schemes.
That's right, and then you have this Antyodaya Yojana. I do not know in what way, because I have not seen the contours of the bill, proposed bill, how this bill is actually going to tackle all this within one framework.
Right.
I mean, whether they are going to consolidate or they will actually be there as separate entities. Let us see what exactly comes out.
Okay, Professor Vashisht, of course, there is a tendency in our growing tendency in our farmers to take to cash crops such as fruits and vegetables, especially with an expanding market for processed foods. How do we curb this tendency?
You see, they respond to demand.
Right.
There's so much demand for milk, for rice, for vegetables and fruits. Wonderful. Let them do that. And why do you have to curb it? You see, point is not curb it. Point is, if they feel that they can make more money over there, let them do it. You see, the fundamental question from food security point of view, that is not the right kind of question to ask, that curb it. Let them do that and they are going to respond to it. There is nothing you can do about it, and you should not interfere. The critical problem to me is high imbalance created over the last 20 years.
Right.
And that imbalance is heavy reliance for cereals to procure for a particular region.
Okay.
So these farmers benefit. There are pockets which are emerging, there are surpluses, but there is no infrastructure, there is no machinery to procure it. Like our friend said, why can't you procure, say, dal from a poor region which is low productivity? If they have little surplus, do it. That's where our failure
So
is.
what we have to address is the regional imbalance.
First of all, you correct the structural regional imbalance in production per se. And that confines to Punjab, Haryana, Western AP cereal production, wheat, rice, rotation. You are not able to raise productivity, and there are technologies available. The problem is delivery. One, on the production front, is taking technology to the farmer and creating necessary infrastructure in the eastern region. There is so much potential for paddy over there. So if you lose from Punjab Haryana after diversification, you can more than gain from the eastern region.
Right.
And surpluses are emerging even from pockets like Madhya Pradesh. Certain pockets in Bihar, you are not able to procure because your infrastructure doesn't permit. And the state machinery is hopeless, frankly speaking, let me tell you. And if you go down all the way to State Food Corporation, it's highly inefficient. Their godowns are in a very, poor condition. The distribution system is absolutely broken down. And whether right to food or no right to food, let me tell you, I'm for right to food, not to be misunderstood. But the reason I'm putting very strongly, even if you have right to food, your delivery mechanism is so absolutely hopeless. Right from, State Food Corporation to the household, that there is tremendous amount of leakage. So even with right to food, delivery system is not improved. It's going to be a place.
So unless we overhaul our delivery mechanisms,
correct production imbalances, adjust price policy accordingly, procure from poor areas, extend procurement to like oilseeds, pulses and poor areas, create infrastructure in the eastern region, attack the problem, and I'm not against public distribution. With due apology to you. See, the reason I'm saying there is no magic band to improve it overnight. And it is why I said, wherever you have banking system, wherever you have post offices, particularly in the urban areas, semi-urban areas, peri-urban areas, come back to cash transfer. I'm not saying come back to transfer in travel areas, not the hill areas which is difficult to reach. So wherever you don't have infrastructure, cash transfer is not going to work. Okay, wherever you have infrastructure, don't bother about public distribution. Reduce it rather.
Mr.
Not disband, reduce
the
it.
food security bill is also being touted as a nutrition security bill, something which the Supreme Court directives have also been reiterating.
Absolutely.
Now, how do we ensure securing the nutritional requirements of those at the bottom of the economic
I
ladder?
think it's important to understand that the relationship between food and nutrition is like the relationship between textbook and education. So textbooks are an essential part, but it's a necessary but not a sufficient condition for achieving education. So with food. And nutrition is contingent on very critical factors like access to potable drinking water, clean, safe drinking water, access to sanitation facilities, access to good quality health care. No country in the world has achieved nutritional security, no country in the world, without looking at these aspects. And therefore it's important the National Food Security Act does address these issues. I'm not very sure whether they would be able to do it through this one act. I think it will require a lot more by governments to actually achieve nutritional security. I don't think there is a political will, at least I don't see it in this government, to look at nutrition as a comprehensive issue. I mean, the Prime Minister constituted a Prime Minister's Council for India's Nutritional Challenges 3 years back. 3 years back, this body was constituted. It has 10 cabinet ministers, 10 secretaries. It is supposed to be an apex institution. It has never met so far. Prime Minister Vajpayee oversaw this body for 4 years. It never met even once. So, I think the entire political class, it's not about the BJP or the Congress. I think there is no institutional understanding within government which is entrenched to understand nutritional security. Coming to the issue of farmers, I think, look, let's bring in a little bit of balance and perspective to the discussion on the choices that farmers are making. We're living in a country and in times where 200,000 farmers have committed suicide since 1996. We're living in a country where between the 1991 census and 2001 census, 8 million farmers left farming. And if you look at the difference, one is looking forward to, and I hope Sainath and other people will come up with the analysis once the census results are out, on how many farmers are going to leave farming between 2001 and 2011. How many have actually left? If you ask second generation, if you ask the children of farmers today, do they want to continue in agriculture? They don't. Land alienation is not just happening from food grain crop to cash crop, it's happening to industry, it's happening to real estate, it's happening at a very, very rapid pace because of urbanization in many parts of the country. And these are structural, fundamental questions that I think the Food Security Act really needs to ask.
Right, when we reach the end of the program, I'd like your final comments as to how soon do you think this exercise is going to bear?
Well, I hope that the government takes less time to do this act than Edward Gibbons took to write his Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire. The sooner the better, hopefully by the winter session of Parliament.
Right, Professor Vashish.
Well, it's good to have an act, but let me tell you very frankly, I'm not at all excited about it, just to put it in act. The fundamental issues are something different. Unless you improve the delivery mechanism, even for the existing program, without the act, you can do a lot.
Right.
So I'll be very brief on that and very, very straightforward.
Okay, Dr. Das, very quickly.
Yes, I feel the essence of the act is such that I think it should get support from everyone, because it's a very noble cause. But I am very sure on the elements they will be investigated, so I'm not sure about that.
All right, well, on that note, it's time for us to wrap up this discussion. I'd like to thank all my guests for coming to the studios. It was a pleasure having you here. Well, that's it for now in this edition of Public Forum. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.